morning, everyone. I'm super excited to be here and to share my thoughts with you. I have, however, tried to term my presentation about procurement transformation, but as I looked at it over and over and over again, I felt that when we talk about procurement transformation, we often talk about the evolution from the beginning to going up into world-class when we start and implement the journey of procurement. There are certain nuggets that we don't talk about and that we ignore. And that is the basic two most KPIs that in procurement we actually often are measured on. And in essence, those would be, and can we just move to the next slide so I can just go through the problem statement. In terms of that, I've just said that we often look at the transformation from the buying processes and embracing technology. There are things such as the supplier risk, business risk, compliance. We are now talking digitalization in terms of procurement. How agile are we? And how quickly do we respond? And when we transform in procurement, everybody expects a smooth transition. However, there is an element of a scorecard, like company scorecard, that sometimes nobody is focused on, but they become our problem. And why I say that, every company, every single year, when they go through their financial year results and they put their reports and they do the sustainability report, who do they come to? Because procurement then must start talking to the savings, the small businesses that we are promoting, that we are supporting, the tools that we are working with, how we've supported them. And therefore, today, we're going to be looking at the balance of savings and how we actually are transforming the supply base. And most of you would know that while I have an extensive knowledge in terms of procurement and strategic sourcing, I also have a very deep passion for enterprise and supply development. Then moving on to the next slide. So the key focus would be the transformation of the mindset, the cost of doing business. And at the end of this presentation, I'll then go into the supporting side of things. Now, what do I mean when I talk about transformation or transforming rather the mindset? When I was talking to my team in the week, looking at this presentation, one thing that came out strong and that I know has been coming out strong, that what is an organizational DNA? Who is an organization? Who is a company? How do we define it? I believe that we define it by how it treats its people, things that we have spoken about previously. How aligned is it? How it actually does self-introspection, and how do we learn from that, continuously improve our processes and continuously improve what we do. In procurement, most of the time, we get blamed every single day. Procurement is late, procurement is this, and procurement is that. But we need to get to a point where we change their mindset and teach people what procurement is all about. What is it that we do? Today, we are said to be magicians. And why I use that term? Magicians in the sense that when production is at a standstill, they expect procurement to jump. If they don't jump, they do as they please, right? Over and above that, we should be passionate about creating a local-based supply chain, making sure that we incorporate even subcontracting where possible. That's a controversial statement because subcontracting sometimes can be tricky, especially in terms of how you implement it. I'll talk to that as I go on with my presentation. Cost of doing business as one of the focus. Every company wants to be competitive, but it doesn't want to be one. We also want to be partnering with the communities that we're living in. How do we do that? Because we do that through the procurement bank. We do that through CSI initiatives. We do that by ensuring that we build capacity internally And the internal part of building capacity doesn't only refer to procurement skill. It also refers to building capacity, partnering with the internal stakeholders, ensuring that we influence the business vision, the goal of a company. What does it talk to? Because all of that must then reflect back to how we do business across the value chain of the company, from operations to HR, to finance, to procurement, to legal. Everything is connected together. Externally, how do we partner again with our suppliers that they fully understand that in doing business with the companies, there are certain things that they need to do. We often blame, whether you're in government or in private sector, I've actually worked in both, where you find that suppliers are refusing to deal with the company. Why? Because they're not being paid. Most of the time, they're not being paid because there are certain processes that were not followed. So in all essence, this is the purpose that we need to be looking at, because every company, I as Colette believe that procurement and supply chain and procurement are actually the heartbeat of an organization, because we provide them with assistance in terms of the cost of doing business. We buy for them, we look for them, the right product at the right price, the right quality. We manage the risk for them. We consider all of those strategic interventions across all of these three. They influence and affect more than just those three. We can move to the next slide. Let's talk about change, because for everything else to move and to happen, there's an element of change that needs to be applied and implemented. Look at the maturity of an organization, where it is, right? When we talk about maturity, we can talk about maturity from best practice to world class, but we talk about the mentality of change. Where are people being stuck? Are they still stuck in a certain supplier or a certain process in a certain system, and how do we bring them forward? How have we centralized procurement into the business? Or in my current environment, we had a situation where we had procurement officers sitting across the centers, and even in my previous environment, where we've got procurement officers and sitting everywhere in the regions. And their reporting line is centrally. And the conflict between the two is actually is bad, because they have to find themselves defending why they should sit there. They have to be reporting to a person who doesn't deal with the fire. So in terms of the language and how it's structured in the company, the language that is being used is also very critical. So we continuously train our people so that they can manage the change. The support is also important in terms of how we structure it, because we tend to leave people and thinking, I've left you there and you can do it, and I've told you and I've trained you. That's not how it actually works. It's deeper than that. Now, if we talk about systems and policies, there's an issue here in terms of policy coherence when we talk change management. When we implemented a procurement policy, we found that if you look at an HR policy, I'll use that one as a good example. HR policy says if you're moving somebody from Durban to Middelburg, as an example, HR policy says they can do a 3 code in terms of finding a truck to move their stuff. And once they've done that, it's done. And yet, the policy says for any transaction, you need a purchase order. And who does that? And that is procurement. And one needs to look at all of those policies in a changed environment to make sure that there is no clash, because then it informs a system that would then support that change. And if you look at those systems that you're working on, when I talked to another lady yesterday in one of our divisions, she was telling me that part of the challenges that they're experiencing is an age system. It doesn't even support what we are trying to do right now. And these are all the things that when we sit as leaders, we're discussing the impact procurement would have in the business, we ought not to forget that the systems and the policies need to be talking to what we're doing. Look at the strategy and the direction that the company is going. The vision should support everything that happens, everything that needs to happen. Sometimes it needs to be changed, so be it. The alignment at a senior level that needs to be taken down to every person in the organization. Barloworld is currently implemented what we call Barloworld Business System. And the Barloworld Business System talks to a bottom-up approach where we find that the team that actually does the work is to influence what happens at a senior level, gets to talk to what needs to happen, and the change is driven at that level. Sometimes we fail to implement the change because the change is happening at a higher level. It's not getting done. How do we talk to the BE spend? And that for me is a passion of mine, because the KPIs on that are normally sitting with procurement. I believe that in every single person, in every single leader especially, you need to be sitting there, because as I talked about the lady who was sitting at the center influenced to do certain things, that wouldn't happen because you find that there's a reliance and a certain love of certain suppliers from certain individuals, which then would influence and impact on that spend. And therefore, how do we talk to the after effect spend? How do we talk to the deviations? Those are all the things that in terms of change, they need to happen. Once a person is deviated, it shouldn't be a problem that procurement fixes, but I'll also talk to that as I go down in my slide. Technology. How have we adapted technology in what we do? We talk about fourth industrial revolution today, and now we are talking fifth industrial revolution. And I think lockdown has taught us a thing or two with regards to how we move and how we can work from home. And with all of that, how has then procurement been able to move with agility? And people do not see you, and people need that order that they, that they need, and the things that they need to do. And I think there's a lot of things that we are currently doing in the procurement space. There's a lot that we can learn from each other. And I think from what has been happening in the week, the tools that we are taking into our environments will assist us. But more than anything else, we ought not to forget that technology must also have a part of that ease of implementation, that move, that agility, because procurement, as I said earlier, we're seen as miracle workers, and yet we're not. And as miracle workers, we need to be able to apply certain things in a way that there's a smooth transition. We look at strategic sourcing. In the next slide, I had said that the presentation will focus mainly on the sourcing side and the transformation side, and then we're going to talk about how we bring everything together, because the change today, the elephant in the room, is actually those two things. Because when you enter into any company, you are told you need to save money. At the same time, you're told you need to make sure that the pillar that you are given from a procurement perspective needs to be achieved. You can't falter on that. Now, when we look at strategic sourcing as procurement professionals, we understand that its purpose actually is to reduce the cost to serve. And we've termed it, and we know and we understand it, that to be a true partner, we are an enabler for profitability, an enabler for the growth agenda. But an internal service provider of choice, we ought to provide continuous improvement. And I think today, procurement and supply chain, we've embraced, I think it must have been the first field, I think, that embraced what we call Lean and Six Sigma. Because we understood when we look at Lean and Six Sigma, how we can apply those principles to drive the business, be able to effectively understand what we're doing. And when we talk about Lean and Six Sigma and we talk about efficiencies and the optimization, we've embraced that a lot in terms of procurement, and we've been driving a lot of our efficiencies using those tools. So our ambition, obviously, is to drive the cost, and it's to build the capability and to offer sourcing as a service for customers currently and in the future. So I won't get deeper into the areas that we're focusing on. Obviously, an operating model in the company is important. I've spoken about the processes that need to be aligned. The one element of procurement that people often ignore is that the data integrity is important. How we understand and how we term things. And with all of the data that we use, it assists us to actually reduce the cost of doing business, reduce the cost to serve, and to impact and enable profitability. Governance can never be ignored. Governance can never be taken lightly. We hear every day in the news where everything is procurement related goes with the word corruption in it. And in my view, I don't think that the procurement itself is a cause of corruption. I think it's flouting the rules, it's rushing to do things, it's pressure that we get when we have to do this transaction. But I do believe as well that procurement people, they are strong people and are not the ones that are easily influenced. We have tested ourselves, I think, in many instances. If one looks at the delivering of what I'm talking about, the strategic pillars, right? So I mentioned the issue of data, because understanding our data assists us in leveraging what we need to do and clean out all the duplications. Because often we look at how we buy certain things, and if we don't work on the system and we don't look at materials master and the data, all of these items, you'd find that you're going to be buying the same thing over and over again, but because it's not termed correctly, then we fail to reduce the cost to serve. Our process improvement, I've spoken about the Lean and Six Sigma in terms of how we've implemented it in our value chain. Those principles are properly applied. In terms of enterprise and development, ESD, which is my passion as well, most organizations, including the ones that I've worked with, we tend to do set-asides. And the set-asides, and I think we're evolving from doing set-asides from non-core, including some of the core things that we buy as an organization, as a company, in order to ensure that we've got a strong supply chain and a strong supply base. But all of that, the ESG strategy becomes a cornerstone of making sure that you've workshopped all of this processes. And business partnering, which I also referred to earlier, is collaborating with your business partner. We are servicing them. This constant engagement may help in terms of changing the mindset. I often say category managers and commodity managers are not office bound, actually field bound, because we ought to sit where the action is. Right? We come into the office just to do what we need to do, the administrative part. And most of the time, we field bound, because that's where we get to do most of the work. That's where we get to understand what the burning issues are. And that's where we get to assist in resolving them. But you cannot ignore that we need to also look at our people. We need to nurture them. These workshops that we are talking about, that we are having now, assist all of us in terms of looking at things differently. I listened to Smongile as well, and I picked up a lot of the things that maybe even myself I never understood. We can talk about reading things, and we can send our people in various workshops, but we ought to also understand that giving them opportunities to attend various workshops and talks also assists in narrowing down and clearing and decluttering some of the things that we're facing in our environment. Because most of the things that in this workshop have been spoken about, we all have gone through them. And I was laughing at some of it, because then I When you make notes, you realize, okay, now for myself, these are the things that I need to change. Because for me to be able to lead better, I need to look at my blind spot. We can move, Ayanda. In terms of transformation, we currently have various organizations, in fact, that I even worked on. We had transformation steercos where we look at how we introduce the new entrants, bring the diversity into the supply base, and what the impact of that is. Currently, if I look at the scorecard, you don't want to wake up at the end of the year or where your scorecard must now be done and you've got the verification agents and you start to scratch. And it's an everyday thing that we need to be conscious about. An everyday thing that when you do a contract, we ought to implement. We don't only should look at supply contract. We must also look at, we've looked at those and we have them in place. The contract that we have with our incubators, the contracts that we have, the suppliers that we are onboarding, because the impact is bigger than just the scorecard. We often talk about job created, and if we look at what the impact of COVID has had in most of these industries, I think we are striving right now, at least ensure that we sustain and we create sustainability in the jobs that we're already in the market. And as the economy opens and things start to open, then we can talk about the growth of the industry, because we don't want to find ourselves losing the skill that we've already been building on. In terms of the scorecard imperatives from a procurement perspective, we're looking at the maximization of points, sustainability of the developmental goals. We look at enterprise and supply development, but we don't forget CSI, because all of that ensure meaningful integration of our suppliers into the market. The big one being the commercial side. From a procurement perspective, as we implement the strategic sourcing and the integrating of our suppliers, we forget that the huge impact is that right now, when you do business in South Africa, most companies, they do take into account what your BE scorecard is or your BE level is. And amongst other things, the ESG pillar is one of the strongest pillars that one doesn't want to miss out on. And when we implement the things that we do, most companies also want to know how you're impacting the economy, how you're impacting the small businesses. And the lessons that one gets from the first 2 points that I've talking to are applied as well in the commercial side. But we also need to bear in mind, most of the time, we are told that there is an inquiry at the tail end. And that's why it's important to make sure that where the action is, we are often there. Not only where the supply is, but where the commercial team is, so that we can integrate things quickly. We have a strategy that doesn't only talk to how we're integrating small businesses into our business or the cost of doing business, how we do business smarter and better, but also how we set ourselves apart and how we lead by example. And every organization, when you go out there and you bid for anything, you are able to talk to the social imperatives in a way that you are living it. It's not just work. It tells you about your corporate identity, you become a good citizenship, and it gives you that competitive advantage. It's the impact that it gets. And for most of us that are interested in doing business across the continent, also assist these companies, because if you look at what other countries are now doing, they're starting to take this seriously, to say, we can see what South Africa is doing. How can we do that better? Now we're able to be the value add, able to be the spokesperson of these initiatives that we are running. We run them out there properly. Then how do we sustain? When we talk about we partner with suppliers, relationships are very important and they're key. And to create the organization I've worked with, I realized that sometimes we are working in silos and yet you're one organization. and creating a sustainable supply base that is shared, especially when you're developing. Because if I'm developing a supplier that supplies a certain technology, let's say they're doing IT, we ought to collaborate on that and see how we can incorporate other small players, emerging, rather small is not the right word, I apologize for that, or emerging players in that. So the impact on that, it actually does grow the economy. It also does impact on sustainable development. When I look at some of the ESD partners that one has worked with in the past and currently, the one thing that comes out strong there is that access to market for emerging suppliers becomes a challenge, because you can't give one inquiry in one contract and expect them to sustain. No organization wants any emerging supplier to be dependent on them. But we just need to be thinking about that to say, at what point do we start integrating them in these different divisions, ensuring that they can grow beyond what we are looking at. On to the next slide. And I hope I have not taken more than the time that I was allocated. All right. So putting it all together, we've got category managers or the category management that extracts value through sourcing. It gets implemented. It's technical, the day-to-day. How do we fulfill that? And all of that together when we're managing for value. All we do as procurement professionals, we bring value in the company. Just said now, the value of myself, when for as long as my heart is beating, I'm leaving. But if the heartbeat of an organization is dysfunctional, then we have a challenge. And therefore, if you look at supply management and ESD, we're looking at the entire life cycle. We manage the strategy and the deployment of that. And then we enable the continuous improvement. And then in terms of the enablers that I've already spoken about, the model of an organization, the vision, the goal that the organization is going into, must also incorporate what we do from a strategic sourcing perspective. We're talking about process and governance. One of the key enablers, our policies need to be very strict. Our policies need to be talking directly to how we're implementing, need to be talking to consequence management, the talent and capabilities. We need to often train our people, make sure that we capacitate them, ensure that we give them the tools to be able to stand in the line of fire and hold their head strong. Technology and data, I think I spoke a lot about that. And we can move to the next slide. I'm worried about the time. In terms of the challenges, again, alignment between business goals becomes a disconnect for us. And therefore, you then find that at the end of the year, procurement is on its own with delivering on the KPIs. And yet, as I said earlier, we need to find a way of cascading certain elements of our scorecard into the entire leadership. We need to have those frank conversations in our boardrooms. We need to clearly define the strategy and make sure that we influence the business goal and the business vision. It does talk to the cost of doing business, which will then be taken back and procurement implements it. I used to say that how do businesses do their budgeting? If once they've done their budget, they don't come back to procurement and say, my budget was cut by 2.5%. Please help me find that money. Please help me recover that. Those are the frank conversations that we need to have. Because another challenge that we have, I don't know about other companies, but I think about 4 or 5 that I've worked with. And I'm currently I'm assisting a young man that is starting his business. He's consulting in terms of supply chain. So he's asked me to mentor him. The thing that comes again that is strong in business is that the planning and demand management is a challenge. And it therefore doesn't support anything and doesn't talk to procurement and how procurement is actually done, which then leads to business dictating what needs to be done, leads to procurement fighting fires. We don't want to be fighting fires. We didn't go and train to be firefighters, but we also don't want to be dictated to, because then the impact on that is the savings that we have to do. Then the impact goes even deeper, because then the impact on the scorecard as well of the company. And if we have negative findings. I've managed in the years that I've been with my current company to ensure that we have got 0 findings, and even previously. And auditors would tell you I would fight hard, because I often ensure that my team is properly trained, so that we don't lose the benefits. Again, when it's a finding, nobody wants to take the finding, because if Colette has decided to buy outside of policy, because I was dictated to, the finding comes back to me. And those are deviations that sometimes are not even created by us, they're created by business. But when an auditor sees a retrospective purchase order, a retrospective payment, I have to take that and I have to explain that. Another challenge that I see and that I've come across as well, the collaboration in business. When we talk about cross-functional sourcing teams, which is CFST, when we do an inquiry, we need everyone as part of it. And for me, that doesn't only makes the process seamless and smooth, it creates a change and a change in mindset, because everyone then gets to understand the processes involved, the things that we have to go through. They participate fully, and they give and they have meaningful impact. Because if they're not part of it, again, there's heavy misalignments. And there's going to be long processing times, because the evaluations and all of those things. And if you look at the total cost of ownership, that consideration must never be taken lightly. Because with the cross-functional sourcing team, it gets even incorporated way before we even finalize the bid process. It gets understood in the beginning. It gets incorporated in our sourcing process, and then in our evaluation process, and then allows the business then to relook at the elements that are key in terms of supplier relationship management and customer relationship management. Because all of that we then are able to do is together, because everyone has an understanding of what we are doing. Lack of consequence management. That becomes an issue, and we're seeing it is already currently in government, where a lot of the things, the policies are being flouted, things are happening, and the impact is that there was a supplier that I had a discussion with, had been subcontracted by one of the suppliers in another organization. Now, the supplier that had tendered and won the business is currently struggling. Now they're looking at him taking over the business, but now it's messy now, because he wants to invest, but he can't, because he, in his ethical fiber, he understands that how the original award was done. He doesn't want to drag himself there, and therefore, if we look at ourselves and the impact that we have in business, we always need to ensure that we stick to our processes, we stick to our policies. And obviously, so that we can make sure that all these inefficiencies that are now impacting, if we look at the current situation with the PPE, what is happening now is a huge impact in terms of the nurses in the hospitals and their PPE. The delay is there heavy than if this process had been done correctly. But how are EF policies included in terms of the procurement policies? Because then procurement, as procurement professionals, we are not able to discipline anyone. The company does need to be able to discipline people. Therefore, in terms of the support that I said I was going to talk to you at the end, Ayanda, you would know that on the radio, the past 3 months, they've been talking about rainwater. I think that CIPS, it's procurement assessment, and it was found to be one of the best. And those are some of the things that I think, in terms of using the relationship that we have, one needs to look at that in terms of how do we independently see ourselves as value adding without somebody coming in and doing an assessment and doing a mistake of saying these are the things that you need to check outside of our procurement policies, outside of our auditing. And I think one needs to partner with that so that we can be able to improve on that. I would actually love to take that further so that we can see how we can align. We should not be afraid to share ideas and allowing these professional bodies to assess our strength. Because our strength as procurement or as companies as well lies in how we are able to self-introspect, and how we are able to admit our roles, and how we are agile in terms of continuous improvement.